All right, everyone. Good morning and welcome to CASBO's discussion on the state California budget, also known as the May revise. I'm Tasha Davenport, CASBO CEO, and I am really excited to delve into this conversation today. We anticipate diving into not only the financial specifics, air quote specifics as we know them today, but also the political intricacies that are shaping the budgetary landscape. As we navigate this somewhat complex and a bit ambiguous terrain, we recognize that there are many questions that are left unanswered today as we received tremendous amount of information yesterday, not necessarily detail. But this discussion will serve as a very crucial step in our ongoing advocacy efforts over the next few weeks. So again, we've got some financial specifics. We definitely have the political intricacies and even a couple of like tasty little surprises that we saw in the information that has been released over the past few days. I encourage you to stay engaged and equipped with thoughtful questions as you go through this, as those, again, will help us carry forward into our discussions in our advocacy efforts over the next few weeks as the budget is finalized. So a lot more information will be coming after today, but keep those questions flowing. A few logistics: we are recording. We ask that your questions be put into the Q&A versus the chat. So Q&A so that we can capture those and come back as we get answers. If we don't have them today, the session is being recorded. And with that, I would love to introduce our team that is delivering the information today. Today we have Eric Dill, our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services from Carlsbad Unified School District, and CASBO's president. So welcome, Eric.
Good morning.
Mark Scheel, Deputy Superintendent and CBO of Santa Clara USD, and CASBO's Legislative Committee Chair.
Good morning.
Finally, we have Michelle Gill, our Director of Advocacy and Policy at CASBO. Thank you again for the quick digest of all of the information over the past few days. Let's get this conversation started.
Hi, thank you, Tasha. Good morning, everyone. So I can just give everyone a preview of what things will be looking like. So just looking at the agenda really quickly, we've already done our introductions. We will dive into the fiscal landscape, then Proposition 98 funding, Prop 98 maneuver, cost of living adjustments, facilities, transportation, universal meals, and then we'll wrap everything up with what's next. All right, so looking at the fiscal landscape, we do have a lot of numbers on this slide. It just explains all of the things that have taken place since January. So one thing I do want to say is that, this shows the whole fiscal landscape, but Mark and Eric, if you can please give us some more information about the political landscape and how, the January number was $291.5 billion, but this time in the May revise, we're seeing $288.1 billion. So is the policy and the political side of that?
Yeah, I can jump in, and this is an election year, and so that always plays a factor into what we will see in the Proposition 98 budget. The governor in his press conference on Friday said that he was committed to Proposition 98. He also said that he did not want to see thousands upon thousands of pink slips being issued to teachers. And so what you see is a continuation of his proposal in January that appears to leave education relatively untouched when you look at the rest of the budget solutions that he has proposed. And we'll walk through some of that detail. As Tasha mentioned at the top of the webinar, we have a lot less information right now than we typically see. It was unusual for the governor to have a press conference 4 or 5 days before the actual release of the May revise. And what we usually see is a detailed summary, if that's oxymoron is a thing, but we usually have several pages of discussion of the proposals that will be coming out in the trailer bills in plain English form, along with lots of charts and graphs and detail. And we had just a couple of paragraphs and a few bullet points on Proposition 98 in the budget summary doc. And then yesterday, the trailer bill dropped rather late. And so we literally were putting this presentation together about 20 minutes ago. And we, we just finished about 20 minutes ago as we were going through things. And so this is just very unusual. Even in the briefings that we had yesterday with Department of Finance, they were reading the numbers rather than showing them to us as we would usually see in that briefing to the interest holders on the Prop 98 budget. So we've done our best to try and capture all of that. I don't know, Mark, if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And I think to echo your comment in regards to protecting the education budget, I think the one thing that we see here is that the education budget throughout the May revise is held and protected as much as possible. And where you actually see a change a little bit is on the non-Prop 98 side of the budget. And while we have a May revised budget here of 288 billion, it was actually 291.5 billion in the January budget proposal. So we've seen the total size of the entire budget decrease since the January budget, but largely on the non-Prop 98 side and not a lot of impact on the Prop 98 side. To your comment in regards to the governor and this being a little bit different, I just wonder, I mean, how many CBOs are thinking about doing a little bit differently on issuing their budget proposals going forward and doing it a little bit differently too on their board presentations? Maybe this is a new strategy for all of us to consider going forward.
So what you're saying is we should just give a summary and then go on vacation?
If it works for the governor.
Yeah, you know, I think we still have to get our SAC stocks in on time, though.
Yeah, we'll check with Mike on that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I think this was my slide going into Prop 98. You can see the differences and the recasting of the minimum guarantee levels for Proposition 98 from January to the May revise. However, it's important to remember in 22-23, the enacted budget was 107 billion for Proposition 98, and you see now the governor has recast that down to 97.5 billion. We're always looking at the budget in 3 years: prior year, current year, and the budget year. We're going to talk about how he does that upcoming in a few slides with the Prop 98 maneuver. In 22-23, the enacted budget was 108 billion. So now you see they're recasting that down to 102. But the overall Proposition 98 proposal from January to May remains the same. And how they're doing that, we'll be discussing withdrawals from the stabilization account and other actions that the state has taken in terms of the overall budget.
And I think the piece here is that with the way Prop 98 works, we always are seeing adjustments for the prior year. But those adjustments are typically smaller in nature and usually increases. What we're seeing this year that's a little bit different is it's a pretty big adjustment compared to the original estimate, and it's all downward. And so that is certainly a different situation than what we've seen in past situations and in past years. I think the Prop 28 is interesting as well. We have seen a decline in Prop 28. For a reminder to everyone that Prop 28 is calculated based upon the size of the overall budget. And so we know that the number for next year is now 907 million. And Proposition 28 also says that whatever is the number at May revise, that is the number. So we don't need to worry about any adjustments of that between now and then. And that decrease is about $5 per student based upon the estimated number of students that we have in the district. So it is a $31 million decrease. But when extrapolating that out across the number of students that we have in California, it works out to about $5 a student.
Okay, so the overall budget continues to be in a test one situation. We'll talk about that, whether we truly are in test one or not, but that's the Department of Finance's suggestion that we are in test one. And you can see the overall per student funding levels have changed a little bit. The overall dollars per student does take into account now TK through 12. So while TK enrollment has gone up, overall K through 12 enrollment has gone down, but attendance has slightly ticked up a little bit. All of that is factored in to come up with these dollars per student ranges that the governor cited on Friday.
And I think that's the piece is we recognize that we are, as a state, in a declining enrollment situation. Coming out of the pandemic, it's great to hear that attendance is improving a little bit. And that TK is offsetting some of those declines, leading to that slight increase in ADA throughout the state. But we recognize that if TK was not included, we would still be in a true declining enrollment situation throughout the state.
Yeah. And then for a Prop 98 rainy day fund, yesterday, during our briefing with Department of Finance, it was brought up that they're depleting the entire fund. Sounded a little scary, but Eric and Mark, if you can please elaborate that, in situations like this, it is normal to do so.
Well, this was the whole purpose of creating a rainy day fund at the statewide level within Prop 98, was in the bad times, they had money that was set aside to insulate K-12 education in the future. And so, yes, it's a little scary that we are using the rainy day fund and, as you said, depleting it, or as the governor said, depleting it. But that is the purpose of this, is in the rainy day situations that you use the rainy day fund to provide that protection. And if you're not going to use it then, when are you going to use it? So I think that is, it's great that we have it, we're using it and making it available. And it's serving its purpose. Eric?
Yeah, and so the mandatory withdrawals are triggered in years when the funding is not available to stabilize Proposition 98. What we heard yesterday is that we can anticipate the public school system stabilization account, also known as PISA, to be fully expended by the end of 24-25. And so one thing to keep in mind is that whenever the PSSSA is below 3%, that triggers off the reserve cap. And so that's something that you can keep in mind. I would say, we always want to try and maintain our reserves as high as possible. There may be an opportunity to go above the 10% reserve cap beginning in 25-26. But that remains to be seen with the final budget act and what happens next year. But if we do drop below that 3%, or if it is fully depleted as was suggested yesterday in the next year, that could be a consideration for your ending balance in 25-26 and going forward until we're back in all of the four triggers that put that cap back in place.
So the Prop 98 maneuver, there's been a lot of discussion about this. Even on Friday, the governor didn't really formally address this. It just came up in a Q&A session afterwards, and we were able to catch that the number is pretty different than what was introduced earlier on this year. So initially it was $8 billion maneuver, but now it's $8.8 billion. So Eric and Mark, please help us understand.
Well, it's taken us quite a bit of time to understand this too, and Mark is always the first one to say, "Oh, these are only generally accepted accounting principles," and so if they're only generally accepted, we don't need to follow them, right? I've heard him say that many times. Not that he does that in his district, I will say. So. With the Proposition 98 maneuver, essentially what the governor proposes is to lower the minimum funding guarantee for 22-23 by that $8.8 billion, but not recapturing the funds that had already been quote unquote over appropriated. So, they recognized that it would be impossible to take all of that funding back from LEAs after it had been given to them, and they finished their school years and had spent those funds. But on paper, it is to say, well, you really were in a lower test one situation, and the $8 billion that you were over appropriated, the non-98 side will cover that overpayment over the next 5 years. And so, since then, this has increased to 8.8 billion. And what we heard was that the governor, while on Friday he was pretty adamant that he believes that this is appropriate and that it can be implemented. There are many questions that remain on the legality of this and the constitutionality of the maneuver. And essentially what we look at here is the difference between test 1 and test 2 is test 1 is approximately 40% of the Prop 98 receives approximately 40% of the general fund. Test 2 is that Prop 98 receives no less than it received in the year before. So if we were looking at an enacted budget in 22-23 of 107 billion, that should set the bar for funding in 23-24 and then going forward. But this retroactive, recalculation that is so much drastically lower after the funding has been given to us really does raise that question of, are we really in a test 1 year this year, or are we technically in a test 2 if you were to count that full 107 billion that we received in the prior year? So these are all questions that remain. What all of you want is some sort of certainty between now and the adoption of the Budget Act in June of what you're going to put in your budgets. I think it's safe to say that we will get no less than what the governor has proposed, and that the legislature would feel okay with adopting a budget at that level. If we are in that test 2 or even a test 3 situation, and the state is unable to fund that, the legislature can suspend Prop 98 by a 2/3 vote. And so, they would have the ability to say, yes, you are entitled to more funding under test 2. However, we don't have the resources available. We're going to suspend Prop 98. They can fund 98 at a lower level. And then that creates a maintenance factor where the state keeps track of what we should have been funded under test 2, and that there are triggers to restore us up to the level that we should have been funded to in a subsequent year when there's revenue growth. And so these are all questions of how this will work, whether this maneuver actually takes place, or if others convinced that maybe protect the integrity of Proposition 98 and the very complicated formulas that were put in place so that it could not be manipulated in ways. Those are the discussions that I think are happening up in the Capitol right now. And the main concern that we have as an association, I think all of us who care about the integrity of Proposition 98 is, okay, so this maneuver at least gives us some sort of certainty, and it's tied somewhat to test 1. So we would know what we're getting in the next year. And it's really not that bad. We're not in a situation where Prop 98 is suspended and we're being cut from what we believe we are entitled to in the following year. But what happens if this now becomes a new mechanism that the state would have in place to at any time say, I'm sorry, you're in another test and we're going to not count the funding that we gave you, but pay that back in a subsequent year? We just don't like the precedent that could set when we're in a year when it could be much worse if Proposition 98 were manipulated in that way. So, we continue to watch this closely. We are continuing to have discussions with the governor's team and also with the key policy and committee leaders in the Capitol as this works its way through, and we'll certainly keep our members updated on the status of this. Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, and you kept referring to the manipulation of Proposition 98. And I think that the thing that we keep hearing is it's not a manipulation, it's a maneuvering of Proposition 98. With this, I'm encouraged that they're still having discussions about it. And I do worry about when we talk earlier about what does this mean politically? I worry about the precedent this potentially sets. What if 1 year down the road, we're supposed to see a significant increase in funding? And they say, you know what, we're going to maneuver Proposition 98 again and not give you everything that you're supposed to receive in order to help out the other side of the budget. And so I worry about what precedent this could also be setting for the future Proposition 98 going forward.
All right, and this leads us to our cost of living adjustment discussion. On Friday, the governor didn't really explain or clarify these numbers. He just referred to his mathematicians and physicists in his briefing. So Eric and Mark are mathematicians and physicists. If you could please explain, where these numbers are coming from, because it was just 0.76% earlier this year, and now we are seeing a bit of an increase in this number now.
Yeah, I think with all of the information that we have on the budget, we could have just led with this slide and said the COLA is 1.07%. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, get back to putting your budget together. You can put this all in your LCFF calculators. Yeah, and there was confusion when the governor referred to the 1.07% COLA bid. He didn't say he was going to fund it on Friday. I think we expected that to happen, and we got confirmation of that yesterday. I think the thing to note here is that about $3 billion of LCFF is being paid for out of rainy day funds and reappropriation of other funds. So again, to Mark's point earlier, the stabilization account is doing its job, and it's propping up LCFF along with Proposition 98 by using these one-time funds to preserve our ongoing revenue. And so, we expect that to happen next year, and we'll see what happens a year from now when we are at the May revise in 2025 of whether, after depleting all of the rainy day funds, they can continue to sustain the level of funding that we would anticipate through the COLAs.
And I think we are saddened that this is such a significant drop in the COLA from what we're just coming off of. Several years of record-breaking COLAs that we've experienced. And we're happy that it's higher than the 0.76%. But the reality is, with a 1.07% COLA, that COLA will be eaten up, if you will, by just normal cost inflationary increases, whether it be rising costs of natural gas, electricity costs. We've
insurance
increases,
pension,
CalPERS, all of those normal increases that are going on right now. Special education costs are continuing to increase as well. That will all exceed the 1.07% in all of our districts. And so this doesn't provide a new windfall. It just helps provide some level of cushion to those costs that we are already incurring anyways.
And with the final year of the ADA hold harmless dropping off the 3-year rolling calculation, most districts are going to see a significant drop in their average daily attendance for funding purposes that they'll be using next year. And so if you only have a 1.07% COLA, but a significant drop in your ADA, that means less funding next year than what you're receiving this year. And so hopefully districts have recognized that problem and have started to make adjustments in their spending in order to right size the amount of funding that they're receiving versus how much they're spending next year.
Absolutely.
Team, we've got a couple of questions on COLA, and I don't recall in our last couple of days if we've heard the answer to this, but does COLA apply to adult school CAEP funding as well?
What we have seen and what we've heard is that any of those programs that have historically received the state COLA will receive the 1.07%. There might be one out there that I'm not aware of, but generally I would say if you typically get the COLA, you're going to get the COLA.
And we did not hear what COLA is proposed for the next 2 years in those discussions, if I recall.
Yeah, they go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say I have not heard anything yet.
Yeah, the briefing that we had yesterday, there was no update, and so I would refer you all to the School Services of California Dartboard. That's the most recent update that we have on out-year COLAs, and I'm certain that they'll be adjusting that in the next week when they have their workshop, and usually the updated dartboard gets released at the end of that.
Thank you. And we've been asked to just repeat the 3-year rolling average comment. Were you meaning that COVID year, where we did not have to report an ADA figure, will be falling out of the 3-year average calculation?
I'm starting to lose track of where we are in time and space and which years are in or are, but I believe the year that is dropping off is the year that was bolstered by a higher attendance yield. So it's not the year that is that was rolling over from one year to the next, but it's the higher attendance yield year that was off of your actual ADA. I believe that's dropping off. This is where I admit that next year my district is going to be in basic aid. And so with that low COLA, I knew that no matter what my ADA was, I was going to be basic aid next year. And so now it's lost on me of which one of these years is dropping off. But I believe it's the year when we were able to use a higher attendance yield on our lower enrollment that's dropping off, and we're back to 3 years of actuals now.
It looks like Nicole has suggested it's 21-22, just for folks that may not see that. All right, thank you.
Okay, so that was a hold harmless year, 21-22. Yeah.
Yeah, so moving on to school facilities, we are seeing there's now in the May revise an 875 million reduction. Initially, it was 500 million, but now we're seeing that additional 375 million have been added to decrease the shortfall. This also leads us to a little bit of a policy subject. So CASBO is supporting Assemblymember Tsuchi's facilities bond bill. It's AB 247. So it seems like the administration is really relying on what November will look like. Historically, the bonds have been much more supported when it's K through 14. There is also a competing bill in Senate. It's SB 28 by Senator Glazer, but that one focuses from K through 16. So, the legislature and administration will have to sit down and come up with a solution about which bill will make it to the November ballot. And we are really hoping that would be the K through 14 facilities by Assemblymember Murad Tsuchi, because historically it has been supported, but if it's not supported in November and the bond is not passed, then the administration would have to come up with solutions also. Yeah. So Mark and Eric, do you have any thoughts on that? Like how that could play out, like if it is passed or if it's not, what that might look like?
Well, I think when we knew that there was going to be needing some fixes to Prop 98, the fact that there is a reduction in the Prop 90 or in the budget related to school facilities is probably not surprising to many of us, because it's an easy area to potentially go to solve a budget solution. Again, we never have enough money to address our school facilities, and so we're always needing more. I think that this is what we're doing now, is we're taking this money that was in the budget proposed to address school facilities and essentially kicking that can down to the road and putting our eggs in November 2024 ballot measure. And the worry is what happens if we don't have a measure passed in November 2024. We will still, who knows what the next budget cycle is going to look like. It's going to take a significant amount of improvement in the state economy to right size or fix the current economic situation that we're in the statewide budget. And until that happens, it's going to be difficult, I think, for the administration to continue to put money from non-Prop 98 into the schools facilities budget. So I think this is a great opportunity to seek assistance from all of the school districts in California to really assist CASBO in advocating for as you said, the assembly bill that we're proposing and the K-14 bill that is out there, and to really get behind that and hoping that that is the one that will be on November 2024, and then assisting and telling the story about the need for additional financial resources for school facilities as we move forward. This is a follow-up to the last slide. And not only did we see the loss of the 875 million, but also the 550 million for early education programs as well has been removed from the budget. So again, coupling that into the K-14 bond measure and hoping that that will be included in November 2024 ballot language.
And just getting into transportation, this is where we were surprised because, you know, we saw that in the January budget, it was only $500 million. And we were just hoping that it would either be cut or flexed, but now we're just seeing more numbers being added, and now it's $895 million in total. So Mark and Eric, what are your thoughts? What are you guys thinking about this?
I love the idea of getting to green bus fleets. I struggle that we know that in many of our communities across California, a green bus fleet does not work. There's too many miles and not enough miles, and the technology is not there yet to meet the needs of some of our school districts and some of our communities. I'm glad to see that they're putting money behind the initiative. I just worry that the technology and all of the infrastructure pieces aren't in place yet in many of our different areas to support this yet. But I also know we have a short runway to full implementation in about 10 years.
Yeah, and this is where, politics and policy come into play. This is something that we thought, hey, these are dollars that haven't been spent yet. They were set aside in prior budget years. Certainly this would be a nice big opportunity to use these dollars elsewhere in the Proposition 98 budget. However, there's a goal to reach this target of green buses, and so the governor is signaling that they're serious about this, and which is why it wasn't cut and it wasn't flexed as part of the other solution. So it's definitely a strong signal from this administration that they are serious about this.
Yeah, absolutely. This was the other surprise. I know when we were having conversations earlier in the year, there was some level of worry that maybe in order to solve the budget, we could be seeing a decrease in funding towards the Universal Meals Program. And instead, what we saw is a significant increase in funding towards the Universal Meals Program. And I think that that's a positive message. It's a positive message that this program has meant so much to many students throughout the state who are now having access to two free meals every single day on our school campuses. And so I was surprised by this yesterday when this came down. I thought it was a great way. Eric, as you and I were talking earlier, I said, people are happy when they're well fed. And so, maybe this is a way for him to try to make us all happy by putting more money into food programs and to make us happy. But I think it also really speaks to the positive impact that this has had on our communities.
Yeah, it was interesting. In March, CASBO had its advocacy days, and we had nearly 60 meetings with legislators and staffers and key people. And it was interesting in our debrief that a number of the teams had conversations where legislators were shocked that middle-class people were taking advantage of this. And maybe this was an opportunity to reduce, because the idea was that this was meant for lower income, and they didn't really realize that people will take advantage of something that is free or no cost to them. And my point, having worked in your district, Mark, knowing that the extremely high cost of living up in the Bay Area, and when I was at Santa Clara, and seeing the number of people who were just above the income level who didn't qualify for free and reduced meals, this working poor, that's really who this program has benefited. It was are those people that that it doesn't take much to exceed that low income threshold, and so there are a lot of families out there who are now receiving this benefit with that they weren't entitled to before.
Just a couple of questions that have come in. I'll throw them out there while we're here. If a district was already approved for TK funding, will there be a delay in the funding distribution?
Not sure what that is asking. If you're receiving for the facilities funding.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, it does say facilities. My apologies. I made it much more vague and random than it needed to be. Sorry. Stump your panelist.
I don't know that we have the information on that. If it was already approved out of the facilities funding and it was through that program, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a question for follow-up. I don't have that.
Well, it's great. This is what we want to take into some of our efforts over the next few weeks, right? These questions, and get this clarification.
I know when the early actions were proposed that we're going to pull back on the investment in the state facilities program, that those districts that had already been approved through the SAB were going to be receiving their payments, and that there would be a chill on future payments. I'm not sure how that plays in with the TK proposal.
And over the past few days, I don't believe we heard anything on community schools, Kim, but can anyone else recall if we heard any dialogue around that?
No.
Yeah.
But another one for our list. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for these questions. We will have briefing with Department of Finance in pretty soon this week, and we can take these questions, and if you can just email to our GR team, we can get back to you.
Yeah, our legislative committee is meeting with representatives from the DOF tomorrow morning.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're coming close to the end here, but there were a number of other things that we saw in the trailer bill. First thing, with the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, you may recall that through a settlement that the state entered into, districts who had a balance in that block grant and were planning on spending those dollars next year needed to develop a plan with a needs assessment using research-based methods to improve academic achievement among targeted students. And there was some question in there about funds that were unencumbered, and whether that meant unplanned or unspent or unencumbered. They've stricken the unencumbered language, but importantly, they have delayed the requirement to develop that needs assessment to 25-26. So if you had plans to use these dollars into next year already, it appears, if this proposal were to survive in the next month, that you would not need to develop that plan until 25-26, and that you could continue to use the funds in the ways that you had intended for the upcoming year. This is one of those where we say, watch this one closely, because you may need to quickly pivot. This is another area where I say I'm not watching this closely, because we had intended to spend all of those dollars in my district this year, but I did have my eye on this, because if you recall, these dollars were cut mid-year last year, and then almost entirely restored by the end of the year, with the promise to pay the remaining balance in 25, 26, and 26, 27. So, if you're a district like mine where next year you didn't intend on having any dollars and really weren't worrying about this plan requirement, this could be triggered back on if the state is able to meet its promise to pay the rest of that block grant allocation that was cut mid-year last year. So keep your eye on that. More news as it develops. And then on the arts and music instructional materials discretionary block grant, they're proposing a final expenditures report that would be filed after the end of the 25-26 school year, and that the state would have a plan to recapture any unspent funds. So what is the advice to you? Spend those funds. What we
Well,
did. Go ahead.
Eric, is that also your advice for the learning recovery block grant as well?
Yeah, there and districts may have other plans on well, first of all, yes, spend those dollars before they expire. That is always the advice.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Spend those dollars first, spend them before they expire. Don't write a check back to the state. What I am saying is you may have a little bit more flexibility in how you use the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant into the next year. And there may be a way that you could continue to use those funds in the way that you intended to, if they meet the requirements of the needs assessment that you must perform and the students who you are serving with those funds. You may still be able to in 25, 26 and 26, 27 still be able to use those dollars in the same way if it all comports with that new requirement. So, but yes, spend the dollars, don't write a check back. Don't let the state recapture that. So what we didn't see in the trailer bill language yesterday is any mention of the word deferrals, and we had confirmation with that in our briefing yesterday that there are no deferrals that are proposed. Now we are in the middle of May. We still have through the middle of June to get through the negotiations between the administration and the legislature. So that is not to say that that could not happen. It absolutely could. So if you are out there, make sure that you protect your cash and that you've got a really good cash flow. And that if there were to be a short deferral from June to July, or maybe one that would last a little bit longer, that you are stress testing your cash and that you are making plans if a deferral were to be announced. Particularly if, you're one of those districts that relies heavily on state aid, or if you're one of those districts that might be flipping from state aid to basic aid, and you are counting on those apportionments to get you through to the big property tax receipts in the fall, make sure you know where your cash is.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing that we did not see was additional funding that would trigger the 1 to 10 TK staffing ratio from the current 1 to 12. So if you recall, if the state funds that, then we must lower that staffing ratio. We didn't see anything that would trigger that. I don't know if you have anything to add to any of those, Mark.
No, and I think your point about deferrals and cash, I think, whenever we talk about deferrals, I remember prior conversations with our friends over at FICMAT, where they would always say cash is king. And then when we were really going through the bad times, it was the ability to borrow is king. And we're not in the really bad times, but we are in a time where we always need to be worrying about cash. We hope for no deferrals. We recognize that there is always the possibility of deferrals. And so keeping that eye on cash and being able to react and protect yourself is really important.
Yeah, I could even see a scenario going back to the Prop 98 maneuver, where if something different were negotiated and we were to see a suspension of Proposition 98, maybe the way they make it work is through a short-term deferral. So, all of these things remain to be seen. And our audience out there, we are all very cautious people. And so, that is the advice that we are giving you, is use caution and be prepared for whatever we may see in the next month as the legislature and the governor agree to a budget deal.
I also want to thank our audience for submitting these questions. As mentioned, our legislative committee really digs in again tomorrow, our third meeting now with the Department of Finance to ask some of these questions. So we have captured these through the Q&A, and we will continue to add this to our list of discussions. A couple more. I don't believe we had any changes mentioned to ELOC funding or the transportation reimbursement rate. I don't recall hearing. Am I correct?
Correct.
Correct.
All right, so we will add that to the list. And then we have a question about COLA. What would CASBO recommend for whether or not to assume the COLA will be funded for 25, keep projections at the 70.76%, or use the full new COLA amount?
I think, to go back to what Eric just said, we are cautious individuals. And I don't know that there is an absolute answer on that question, because I think it depends upon the situation in each individual district. A district who has a significant amount of local reserves might be able to assume a little bit higher of a COLA, because they know if the COLA comes in a little bit lower than that, or lower than their anticipation, they have their local reserves to fall back on. A district dealing with maybe not significant reserves, maybe you're right at that 3% threshold, or you have some other political dynamics going on in your school district, you may need to use a lower COLA. You may need to use that 0.76 COLA, or even a 1.07 COLA all the way throughout. The most relevant information we have right now is what is out on the school services dartboard. We know that that dartboard will be updated if they follow their typical trend. We know that that dartboard will be updated after their conference here shortly. But I think that our recommendation would be it's dependent upon what's going on in your local district.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely good advice. And the only thing that I could add to that is show your math.
Yeah.
And so if you are in a position where you are intentionally using the lower COLA until it is certain that we will receive that slightly higher COLA, be upfront and honest about it and say, okay, we're right on the edge here, and we don't want to overspend next year, so we're using a lower revenue assumption. If higher revenue comes in, this is what it would be and what we would do with that. So that you're not being accused of hiding money or being unrealistic in your assumptions. You just say, here, this is my assumption that I'm using. And if you are using that higher COLA, fortunately, it's not that much different. But if you are using that higher COLA, I know all of us run scenarios in the background to say, okay, what if it were to come in lower, and what would that do? And again, to Mark's point, if it sends you in the wrong direction with your ending balance, then you need to be having those conversations with your superintendent, cabinet, and board.
Absolutely. I certainly would not be recommending an 8.32% COLA.
I answered some questions online that have to do with the release of the new calculator, undetermined, the discussion about charter schools that has yet to come up in any of the briefings that we have been involved in, which again have been many over the past weekend. And so we can bring those forward in our legislative committee meeting tomorrow.
I happen to know that FCMAT is working on the new calculator because my district is helping with the testing on that. And so I've seen emails going back and forth, and they should be released. I'm not going to speak for FCMAT, but they will be releasing it very soon.
Thank you. I did see a hand raised. Okay, sorry. Let me just see if I can grab these. It looks like Kimbray Sargent. If you would like to ask a question, please go ahead. All right, Kimbray, if you'd like to put your question into the Q&A, we can handle it there. Timothy, I'll take you off of mute, and please feel free to ask your question. All right, for anyone that's trying to raise your hand and ask a question, please put your question into Q&A. We are unable to hear you or unmute at this moment. So let's try a different path, which will be the Q&A.
Misclick.
Timothy had a little misfire there on his click. So please just enter your question into Q&A, Timothy.
And I can just go over about what's happening next in the legislature and the Capitol. So, we will continue to have conversations with the Department of Finance. As we've mentioned, we are meeting with them tomorrow. The Legislative Committee is meeting tomorrow. We will also discuss about what we are thinking about the proposals and also developing a response to be sent out to the Education Committee chairs and to the leadership. We will also start sending out calls to action, so please do keep an eye out on our emails. Calls to actions are regarding budget asks and also policies, because we are meeting a lot of policy deadlines in the Capitol right now. And then the next 2 weeks are just a lot of bills discussions on the Assembly and Senate floor. And then lastly, just now the May revision is out. The legislature will have 1 month to come up with their own trailer bills, their own proposals, and we'll continue to have a lot of discussions with Department of Finance. And they have to submit the budget to the governor by the 15th. And then governor will have some time, and then he has to sign it in June. So just a lot of moving pieces happening, budget also, but policy. And then this is one of the busiest times in the Capitol and legislature.
Yeah, and I will just say, answer those calls to action when we send them out. We do know that they do make a difference, and we make it very easy for you when that call to action comes into your inbox. You literally do 3 clicks. Where you would click on the link in the email. It takes you to the CASBO webpage where you enter in who you are and what district you are in, and it will send a message to your legislators to support or oppose. And we've also done this with the governor's office as well. And we were very successful last year in getting a veto on a bill that we were in opposition to. And we received comments back from the governor's staff that they said it was very hard to ignore the thousands of emails that we were receiving on a particular item. And it helped the governor support the reasoning behind his veto because he saw so much opposition. So please do. It only takes a minute. It pre-populates a message, and you can also just delete that message and put in your own information. It does go to your legislator or to the governor, and they do count those numbers when they're getting ready for votes or signing a bill.
I wanted to say, I just saw we had a Q&A that came in about prior year or current year COLA. And let me say, there has been nothing that we have seen to indicate that any change to the 22-23 or the 23-24 COLA. So there's been no conversations that we have heard of about unfunding or taking back, sweeping, clawing back anything in regards to those 2 COLAs for 22-23 or 23-24.
Yeah, in the upcoming years, as we all know, that is all formula driven and comes from a federal number on the implicit price deflator. And so school services and Department of Finance will report those future COLA estimates and then the final numbers to you, but it has no connection to the state's revenue. And so the ability for the state to fund that is a completely different question, but you will be able to see those dollars as each quarter of financial information comes in and they're able to calculate a new estimate, you'll see those updates over the next year. Well, I want to thank our governmental relations team for putting all of this together and making Mark and me sound like we know what we're talking about here. As I mentioned, we were working on this right up until we clicked live for this presentation, and we certainly could not have done it without the work of the CASBO staff behind the scenes here. We certainly appreciate that. And thank you to everyone who joined this webinar. There will certainly be more information as it comes out and we get more analysis of the trailer bills, and as these bills are heard in the respective committees and the final negotiations happen. Just know that, again, the governmental relations team works very hard on behalf of all of our members to make sure that we get the best possible budget solution, given the politics of what is happening in the financial reality of the state.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. We'll circle back with information as we gather it to keep you informed. Thank you.
Thank you.